Alright guys, today we are going to go through the worst 3 and the best 3 maps in the amazing tactical shooter Hell Let Loose. We've got a lot to get through, so let's get stuck into it. Oh, and be sure to let me know what your top 3 and worst 3 are down in the comments. I will be reading them all. As some of you may know, Hell Let Loose painstakingly create their maps using satellite imagery and photographs. And on one hand, this creates some of the most immersive, realistic, and unique gameplay experiences I've ever had in a shooter. On the downside is, due to this lack of commitment to balance, as a normal game would, you can get some absolutely infuriating maps. Now, after going through all of this, recording the footage and recording the commentary, using the data from the community and the polls, and then actually going on to these hated maps, I had a revelation. Well, maybe revelation is a bit of a strong word, but I will elaborate further at the end. Hill 400 is a map with few superfans, but I feel like this one is a bit of a Marmite map. Hill 400, as the name suggests, is a big hill. Oh, there you go. Teams will spend their time fighting up or down said hill in a dense forest littered with bunkers and trenches. No team really has a starting advantage, but fighting through a foggy forest not knowing where anyone is, even after they started shooting you, is a bit of a rough one. Tanks will have a hard time with the limited maneuverability and visibility, and also struggle to aim their turrets up to hit anyone that is above them, and will easily be ambushed by anti-tank engineer teams. I do believe a lot of players' frustration with this map is the visibility. One quick tip for that is try not to move too much. Stay still, scan the horizon, scan the trees, and you will be able to see people a lot easier. When you move, do it in small bursts. Go to that tree, stop, scan. Go to the next tree, stop, scan. Having said that, Hill 400 has nailed the atmosphere and the sense of realism, which obviously, once again, doesn't always translate to good gameplay. Nonetheless, I've had some pretty good games on that map, and obviously some pretty terrible ones as always, but I feel like the bad outweigh the good due to the slightly unique nature of the geography. Any flank that you do try and attempt is usually overshadowed by one side of the hill. However, most players will still groan at the sight of Hill 400 turn up in the loading screen. Coming up next, and absolutely no surprise to anyone, I'm sure, but Purple Heart Lane, named after the award given to the American soldiers when wounded in battle, and trust me, this battle, there was a lot. In real life, this engagement was absolutely horrific, not just for the heavy losses and wounded, but just the general fighting conditions, flooded fields, deep rivers, oppressive artillery and mortar fire, absolute chaos, and is translated perfectly well into Hell Let Loose. Flooded fields making any attempt to cross said field absolutely pointless. Either you'll be slowed down by the water or just be incredibly visible to the enemy as you try and cross. The rivers are deeper than you ever thought possible. Just endless bottomless rivers. And little to no cover throughout most of the map, which means you spend most of your time on your belly, crawling through mud and water, hoping that random rifleman 300 meters away doesn't spot your helmet bobbing up and down. All of this combines to an incredibly rough gameplay experience for any side. Now, as I said, this is probably fairly historically accurate, which unfortunately, once again, does not translate well to gameplay. There's only so many times you can get obliterated by artillery or shot from someone somewhere, you have no idea. All of these problems translate to a very slow gameplay experience, which Hell Let Loose is already a pretty slow moving game, but adding crawling, never getting anywhere, constantly getting bombarded, it leaves most with a sour taste in their mouth. And rightly so. Personally, I do enjoy the map for what it is in terms of immersion, atmosphere, things like that are absolutely on point. And some good games have happened in the past, I think. However, overall, most games are absolutely brutal for most. And that is probably why you don't see it in many server rotations anymore. I have not played on that map in a year, and that's not for lack of trying. So that tells you quite a bit about people's thoughts on Purple Heart Lane. And the final pick for the worst Hell Let Loose maps is Ramagan, or Ramagan, whichever one you want to choose. Despised by most Hell Let Loose players, and once again, a map that is attempting to favour realism and authenticity over any kind of gameplay balance. With the German side having a large mountain leading down to the bridge, and the Americans largely flat lowlands, the advantage is quite clear on this one. German tanks and anti-tank guns and snipers alike can just camp on top of this daunting mountain and rain hellfire on the poor Americans trying to cross the bridge or hold the bridge. Both sides have giant 3-4-story towers with murder holes to shoot out of. However, on the American side, that is the only height advantage you are getting. Armor is forced to push along the narrow bridge, making it a perfect target for any would-be anti-tank gunner or tank, or just anyone close by with the means to destroy a tank. They are incredibly vulnerable. Not to mention, any savvy commander could drop down a bombing run straight across the map, killing probably the entire team in one go and making it an easy push for their side. All of this combines to quite a frustrating experience a lot of the time and doesn't offer up many options for an effective flank. Even airheads are limited to where you can place them due to the size of the river. One small relief is the iron catwalk beneath the main bridge, allowing for infantry to try and sneak across. However, the catwalk is definitely not fit for 2 people to walk abreast, so you'd probably have a better chance just jumping in the river and hoping for the best. The night map is more of the same, but dark. I would talk about the rest of the map, but I don't think I've ever seen it. People were hating on this map before it was released, after it was released, and still hate it to this day, even though it's actually very rarely seen. Once again, I like the atmosphere, I like the authenticity. I have had a handful of good games where the bridge was not a complete meat grinder. However, the community has spoken, and it is definitely one of the worst, if not the worst. I think it's probably the worst one in terms of gameplay. Alright, now for a little bit of a palate cleanser, but before that, if you are enjoying this video, please leave a like, as it is the best way to support me, and subscribe if you have not done so already. Now with the top 3 maps, starting with Foy and its nighttime variant. Foy is one of those maps that can be intense, tactical, and incredibly cinematic, letting you play through probably the most impressive Band of Brothers episode. The map encompasses the town of Foy itself and the surrounding woodland and farmlands. Each capture sector requires its own unique style of fighting or defense. While at times it does feel flanking options are limited, the possibility is there with some cunning and some ruthless leadership. The woodland itself is its own little nightmare. Any player caught alone or in a small squad will have a mix of anxiety and utter dread when trying to push through one of the open fields, and it doesn't help when an MG42 starts firing overhead, and then you start to wonder, is that shepherd's pie in my knickers? The town of Foy gives you the close quarters combat that everyone seems to crave, while maintaining the absolutely terrifying haunting atmosphere of the whole map. Personally, I get incredible enjoyment out of this map, and especially the nighttime map, and I definitely get more enjoyable games on this than I do bad ones. Having said that, when you get a bad one on Foy, it is pretty bad. that is the rule, unfortunately. If it's bad, it's going to be really bad. Next up, we have Karentan, or Karentan, if you're not a heathen. The map offers up one of the largest urban combat areas and still has some nice open areas for more long-range engagements. The streets are littered with rubble, the buildings are half destroyed and caved in. Any number of buildings could contain a would-be sniper or anti-tank player just laying in wait. Tanks will struggle within the town centre and the streets, unless being supported by some incredible infantry. It's another map where every other capture point feels like something quite unique and interesting, rather than just your average farmhouse. The pumping station and customs being standouts for me personally. And also, I do like some of the smaller canal areas that make little one-to-one fights quite terrifying. At least for me anyway. One weird request I keep seeing on Reddit and from chatting to players in game is people want almost every single building to be accessible and all the courtyards to be open. While I do agree we need to open up some more of the buildings to allow some flanking routes, especially on some of those streets. Jesus Christ, just horrific bottleneck blenders. Especially if you've got an MG at one end just being supported properly, that's it. You can't get down that street. However, imagine having to check every single building in Karentan, or Karentan, in case there's someone hiding in it. It will get tiresome quick. So I think a middle ground is open up some more of the buildings, allow for some more strategic flanking routes, but let's not make it every single one, because I will lose my mind having to search all of those. But overall, the same with Foy. Most experiences on Karentan, even if a loss, is still fun and engaging because of the potential for flanks, the difference in each POI is refreshing. Like I said, it's not all just farmhouses. Each place has its own little unique kind of story behind it. It just offers up something I think most Hell Let Loose players want, that good combination of close quarters combat, medium to long range fighting, but still some cover and buildings to maneuver around. Tanks aren't completely punished by the city and will be stronger outside, but you know, that keeps it a little bit more realistic. Like a tank going down a street isn't going to fare too well, is it? Unless he's hunting me, then obviously he's going to be fine, no one's going to bother him. And finally, the tip of the top best map is Sainte Marie de Mont. The combination of built up towns for close quarters infantry fighting and horrific point blank tank battles causing anxiety and tension in the most veteran players, or a short stroll out of the town will leave you in a ravaged farmland with terrifying trenches and the artillery emplacements at Bracour Manor. Even the large open areas still offer cover and potential concealment with burnt out structures and vehicles, trenches, and even cows. Tanks will have an advantage in some of the open areas, but they are never truly safe from a eager and cunning anti-tank player, hiding in the bushes, within a hedgerow, or just behind one of the cows. I love playing on this map. It offers the most variety in gameplay without sacrificing one for the other. However, its own popularity means it is always being played on every single server, multiple times in a rotation. And after a while, I do kind of want something else. But then a couple of rounds on Ramagan, Hill 400 or Purple Heart Lane, I'm ready to get back to Sainte Marie de Mont. I think what Sainte Marie de Mont manages to do is not make every open space complete horror to cross. And while the cover isn't perfect, it gives you some protection or breaks line of sight for a moment while still making you feel vulnerable. It offers the ability to be tactical and effective. So I'm sure absolutely no one was shocked by the choices made for the three most beloved and most hated maps in Hell Let Loose. But as I mentioned before, a revelation came over me. As we roamed the most hated maps with my friends, we were just getting some footage, driving around, walking through flooded fields. We naturally began discussing the problems with these maps, what we loved about these maps, our experiences on them, and everyone's problems with them. First, we jumped into Purple Heart Lane, and we were driving around the foggy, rain-swept fields, the deep, treacherous rivers, partially destroyed settlements, and all the little nooks and crannies under the bridges and waterways. And we realised that a lot of people want very different things from Hell Let Loose, which is probably not a shock to a lot of people, but I believe that's where the division in people's preference for maps arise. Most people probably want a serious tactical experience with balanced maps, plenty of cover and structures and flanking routes, and that's all to be expected. Then a smaller group want a World War II experience with authentic maps, brimming with atmosphere, hard grueling fights that immerse you and make you come out the other end like, holy crap, that was a fight. Even if you lose, the experience alone of working with a team, down in the mud, fighting, picking friends up, it all contributes. Now the top three are undoubtedly amazing maps, a very nice mix of fighting styles and overall just very well made maps. However, for me personally, they just don't have an atmosphere that these other hated maps actually have. They're perfectly sunlit countrysides with fields, and yeah, sure, there's some dead cows and blown up buildings and burnt out tanks, but that's not enough to make an atmosphere for me. And what happens because of these maps being so popular, Karentan, Sainte Marie de Mont, Foy, and Sainte Marie Église, which is essentially just Sainte Marie de Mont, you end up playing these maps over and over again in a constant rotation. The same four maps usually, occasionally Stalingrad's chucked in, but most of the time it's these four. And after a bit, you do get a bit bored of just seeing this perfect French countryside. I'd say personally for me, to change up these maps, I'd like to see different weather effects in them, just to change things up. So the next time you play, you might have a bit of fog or a heavy rainstorm, something like that. I'm not talking about a hurricane or a tornado or something ridiculous like that, but just something to give a little bit more drama and make the experience feel different each time you play it. I would argue that with some changes to Purple Heart Lane, Ramagan and Hill 400, these maps would be incredible and the community would lap them up. I mean, maybe they need a little bit more than just a bit of work, but I think people lose sight of the things that these maps actually offer, which is a true World War II experience. They might not be fair, they might not be balanced, but it's a unique experience that I don't think any other game actually offers at the moment. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe before you go, and I will see you guys in the next one.